we focused almost exclusively on rapid acquisitions. We were rapidly acquiring things and getting them out to the warfighter. In fact, this is very non-standard, but we were deploying our engineers. We were doing some really great things as far as quickly developing technology and putting it in the hands of somebody that needed it. We went from zero to $1 billion in funding, and there are ways to find funding for things. So this is something that I talk to some of my clients about. So especially if you're in tech development, and you're trying to sell to the government and they talk about funding, there are ways to shake some money loose from the trees in the government. We were really, really good at that. Hey guys, Richard here with the Government Sales Momentum Podcast. This week, we're going to take a little bit of a different path. Normally, we present, the strategies and techniques to acquire government contracts, a little bit about troubleshooting once you're on contract with the government. But it did occur to me, when I'm listening to podcasts or subject matter experts, I do like to understand where they came from, how they developed their expertise. And I thought I'd take this episode to walk you through my path. And although I've touched a little bit on, some of the jobs I've had prior to starting a consulting company, prior to Government Sales Momentum, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my history. So getting started, I grew up in Massachusetts, just north of Boston. Went to high school, went to a private high school up here and college as well. Went to Salem State College. And then during the last year or so of college, my senior year, I really felt a calling to join the military. So I really wanted to be a military officer. And so I investigated the different branches of service and really honed in on the Air Force. That was really where I wanted to be. So I spent some time preparing for the officer qualification test, which is one of the prerequisites if you want to be a military officer. And by the way, if you're thinking about it, or you have maybe a son or daughter thinking about officership and you have some questions, just feel free to shoot that to me. I'm very passionate about the military officer program. It completely changed my life, and it is really an amazing journey if you're considering that as a career, or maybe even just for 4 to 6 years. But for me, it was the Air Force, and so I took the Air Force officer qualification test. And the other prerequisite to becoming an officer is you need a bachelor's degree. So I was inevitably accepted into the Air Force as an officer. So in 1999, I packed up my bags and went to Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, which is where our officer training school is. So there's 3 paths to becoming a military officer. There is officer training school, what they call us, the 12, 13-week wonders, where you just, after college, you meet the prerequisites. If you are accepted, you would go through that program. There's ROTC, which you've probably heard of, where you can be part of the ROTC program going through college, and then you would receive your commission after graduating. And then, of course, there are the academies, like the Air Force Academy, West Point, et cetera, where you would receive your commission after graduating. So for me, it was officer training school. And at the end of that 12 to 13 weeks in Alabama, I received my commission as a second lieutenant in the Air Force. And the Air Force decided I was going to be a navigator. We actually call that a combat systems officer as a profession now. But so a navigator would be doing a lot of the planning for air operations, flying with the pilots and whatever other air crew there for navigating. And there are a lot of aircraft that we still use navigators on for a variety of reasons. So after officer training school, I then went to flight school in San Antonio, Texas. And that was a really great year. Really enjoyed that. I was a brand new officer and made some great friendships there as I was going through the year plus of flight school with 12 plus individuals that were in my class. And we would do everything together, from taking all our classes to flying. It was really intensive. But so was the bonds and the friendships we created there. And I really look back to my time at flight school fondly. And after graduating from flight school with my silver wings as a navigator, I went to survival school and I received my aircraft. So once at some point during your flight training, you're going to, as you're approaching the end, you're going to have a drop and you'll eventually get your aircraft. For me, that was the RC-135 rivet joint. And that is a intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft. And they fly, at least for me, out of Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. So that's where I was headed after San Antonio. Now, at Offutt Air Force Base in San Antonio. So now I've lived in Massachusetts, Alabama, Texas, and now I'm in Omaha. And that was all in under 2 years, kind of moving moving from place to place. So interesting culturally for me just to live in different parts of the country and establish friendships. But the training was really amazing and changing for me, learning how to process a lot of information quickly, especially when you're flying and things are happening really fast and you have a lot of different things to keep track of. And really enjoyed that. And as I was going through the training in Omaha, Nebraska, at Offutt Air Force Base for the RC-135, 9/11 happened. So as you could probably imagine, since I was flying ISR aircraft, which we fly combat reconnaissance missions, reconnaissance operations worldwide, we were in extremely, extremely high demand. So I got checked out, and I feel like I spent the first 10 years of this century deployed nonstop, all over the place. So typically I would return to Omaha for maybe a month or two to get some more training or to just rest for a bit, but it was usually back out the door constantly, back and forth. And that wears you down for a little bit, but I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed my time there. And after about 5 or 6 years of doing that, I did a 1 year remote to the island of Crete in Greece. And so I was doing a lot of different things for the Air Force there, but I got to spend 1 year on the island of Crete. That was fantastic. I mean, talk about amazing food and the weather and everything else that you might think of, and then proximity to Europe, just being able to travel, with my dad and some friends. So that was another really, really great year in mission wise. Also amazing. Got to do a lot of interesting things like working with other countries' military. So we call joint operations, flying with between services, Navy, Air Force, Army, etc. But then we also have our foreign nation partners that we'll fly with. So I got to do a lot of that out there, and it was really interesting, and it really stuck with me. From Greece, now at this point, I have been, really traveling and deploying a lot and a lot of flying. And at this point, the Air Force asked me to come back to San Antonio and be an instructor at the flight school that I graduated from, which I really want to do because I had like I mentioned, such a good time there. And, the camaraderie there with all the other instructors was really something I was looking forward to. And all of that happened when I got back to San Antonio. It was really amazing, kind of now approaching that as, a captain, almost major, which is the kind of transition point between a company grade officer and the military. So think second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, and these are your, at least in the Air Force, these in flying especially, these are your doers. These are the ones flying the planes and really mastering their, the profession that they came into. But, at that point, you're also transitioning into leading people, right? So the military officers are the leaders, the managers of the military services. So now I was also transitioning into leading, quite a few people in different organizations that I was being put in charge of. And all of that was great. And it was an amazing experience. But probably the best thing about San Antonio is where I met my wife. And we met probably the last year or so that I was instructing there in 2009. And had a really great time there. And we decided to get married towards the end of my tenure there in San Antonio, which we did. We flew out to St. John. We got married on the beach. It was amazing. And then we packed everything up and moved to Warner Robins, Georgia to fly the J-Stars aircraft. And so J-Stars, which if you haven't heard of it, you may have heard of AWACS. And AWACS, you've seen it in movies, I'm sure. It's a huge aircraft with a radar disc on the top of it. It's used for command and control. It's kind of like air traffic control, but only in the air. When we're flying missions, we have air battle managers in the back that can figure out where all the aircraft are, make sure that everyone's deconflicted and everyone stays safe. Well, the J-Stars, think of it as the AWACS, only there's a radar on the bottom of the aircraft. So now you're looking at ground targets and people on the ground, and there's some other things that it does. But that is a really interesting aircraft. Another like the RJ, another high demand operational high ops tempo aircraft. And yeah, during our term there, newly married, we had my daughter, just a little over a year after we got married. I deployed 2 weeks after she was born. So, flying missions out there, and a little bit stressful for me and the wife, just, being apart like that with a newborn. I came back, and only to find we had my second son, who was born very soon after that. So they're about a year apart. And so that was great. It was an amazing time. I was really busy doing jobs like wing executive officer and flying missions, but really loved it and learned a lot. And from there, kind of the reward for doing a lot of those different types of jobs, especially as I was a major, so a field grade officer, so company grade, captain, second lieutenant, first lieutenant. But then when you hit major, lieutenant colonel, you become a field grader. So now your scope of responsibility increases. And part of that journey for a lot of us is they'll send you to a master's degree program for a year where you just go to school and you learn a little bit more about senior leadership and how to work with different services, different countries. And that was great. That was in Alabama, back to Alabama at, the same base where I went through officer training school. And an amazing 1 year program. When you hear things like Air Command and Staff College, Air War College, these are 1 year master's degree programs that have officers from not only all of the services. So even though it's Air Command and Staff College, for me at this point, there were Navy, Marines, Army officers there. There were officers from, I think there's over 50 different countries that were going to this school, which really created an amazing classroom scenarios where, as we're going through different operations and military strategy and getting to hear, what was the perspective, for instance, for Operation Iraqi Freedom from, colonels in different countries that were in the Middle East. And, that's invaluable because it can broaden how you think, because, it's easy to think one way, if you listen to, one particular news channel or you have one particular job and you're laser focused and you think things are the way they are, but then you hear the perspectives of all these other people that have had some amazing experiences. It's really broadening. And you also learn a little bit about acquisitions during that school and how the military buys things. So that's when I first started learning about the acquisitions process and funding and how we put companies on contract. Additionally, I had a special moniker going through there. I was being trained as a political and military affairs strategist. So that was to allow me to work with different countries, in jobs to come. So jobs after that school, so I could work with them, whether it was for foreign military sales or diplomatic endeavors that kind of prepares you for that. Now, as amazing as that year was, one thing happened at the end of that year which changed all of our lives forever. And that was, I mentioned, my second child was born in Georgia. That was my son. And at the end of my master's degree program, he was 1 year old, just a little bit over one. And he was diagnosed with a very rare form of cancer called Langerhans cell histiocytosis. And that really knocked the wind out of everybody's sails. And it became very clear we were laser focused on getting him healthy. And so, although we had orders going to Pensacola, Florida after that, and, at this point, you usually go on to command different squadrons and units, which is where I was headed. We were now very much focused on getting Mac healthy, and who's my son's name. So, now, looking at the hospitals in Alabama, they were great, but every day, we were at the Children's Hospital there, we would get a notification saying, "Hey, we just talked to Dana-Farber in Boston, and this is what they're directing us to do." And it became very evident that Dana-Farber and Boston Children's Hospital are one of the premier hospitals in the world for treating what my son had. And so we decided that for us, we needed to be in Boston at Dana-Farber. That's where we wanted him to be treated. And the Air Force did a great job. Everyone I'd worked with, they changed my orders and changed my entire career at that point. So that's when I switched from flying to acquisitions, because Hanscom Air Force Base, which is the big Air Force base in Massachusetts, they don't have a flying mission. They are an acquisitions base, meaning the profession of putting companies on contract for the government. So now I had to change careers, which really for me was secondary to, getting my son healthy, which he is. Dana-Farber did an amazing job. He's been cancer-free now for years. And, I can't thank them and the doctors there enough. Yeah, they did such an amazing job. If and by the way, if you know anyone that has been diagnosed with LCH, we saw Dr. Dagar at uh, at Dana Farber, and I credit her with saving my son's life, like hands down. So Mac was on the road to recovery. Everyone was really happy. In the meantime, I was learning all about acquisitions because not only was I jumping into acquisitions as a program manager for the first time in my career, but I was also as a field grade officer and almost a lieutenant colonel at this point. I was being put in charge of people doing that job. So I had to really learn the job of acquisitions. And if you think about what a military officer does. The ultimate, if you stay in for long enough and you do well enough, you become a general officer, right? And so the general officer really needs to be able to go into any situation and lead. That's why it's general. So not just flying, not just battle on the ground, but you get thrown into so many different realms that you really need to be able to adapt your leadership style. And so this was a big challenge for me. So I had to, with all the flying and operational experience I had, I now had to learn the acquisitions, all of the rules and the federal acquisitions regulations, and how we worked with finance and engineering and in the different companies that we were putting on contract. So it was really an amazing time for me as far as expanding what I was doing. And we really had an interesting angle there too. The branch I went into had just some of the work, the contracts they were managing had gone away before I got there. And I still remember the senior leader there said, "Hey, look, Rick," and some of the guys I was working with, "Here you have a branch with, about, 50, 60 people in it, but not a lot of work." And goes, "Hey, and there's no funding. So, we'll talk about things like PEs in other episodes, but because there was no contract and there was no real funding there, he's like, look, you guys can make this into what you want it to be." So he was pretty hands off, which let us really create an amazing unit. So I'll tell you, watching that go from, a bunch of guys kind of looking for things to do, not really sure, to we started, from my perspective, one thing I did understand was the operational need, right? And I knew what it felt like to be an aviator, an airman out there in the field, needing a technology or having something that didn't quite work, and then wondering, where are the guys that are supposed to supply me with the new thing or the technology that we need to defeat the enemy or to save lives. And so I wanted to help solve that problem. I wanted to expedite that. So we focused almost exclusively on rapid acquisitions. We were rapidly acquiring things and getting them out to the warfighter. In fact, this is very non-standard, but we were deploying our engineers. We were doing some really great things as far as quickly developing technology and putting it in the hands of somebody that needed it. We went from zero to $1 billion in funding, and there are ways to find funding for things. So this is something that I talk to some of my clients about. So especially if you're in tech development and you're trying to sell to the government and they talk about funding, there are ways to shake some money loose from the trees in the government. We were really, really good at that. So that's probably a conversation for a different episode, but it really sparked my passion for acquisition, seeing how we could do things pretty quickly and really make an impact. And one of the things I noticed during this is, I ran a cell called Material Solutions Analysis at one point, where all I did was met with companies that had technologies I was potentially interested in. And I really got to see firsthand the struggle companies with great technologies, great products, great services have, especially small businesses selling to the government, when they don't understand the process or they have a minor understanding of the process. I also got to see, there were a few small businesses that were really good at it. And they and the big OEMs, we got the big defense contractors, they really had a system down for business development, for marketing, for getting their technology in front of the right people, for targeting. And that's really what I based my entire strategy on with my clients is, hey, we want to take you from maybe not knowing much or doing it in a way that's not going to give you the results that you're looking for to, hey, let's mimic some of these companies and the way that I saw them really generating sales, and it's working. So that was really an eye-opening and profound experience for me. I did, after about 4 or 5 years of that, I did a 1-year remote to Saudi Arabia. I worked in the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Defense for a year. I was the U.S. government's representative there. So basically, I was managing their foreign military sales, and they were, at the time, our biggest purchaser of foreign military goods. or military goods from us. So, all of the contracts, the negotiations between the two governments, a lot of the diplomatic things that were involved there, is really a chance for me to put together everything I learned in acquisitions, my operational background, and then the political and military affairs strategist piece I learned at Air Command and Staff College. I got to really tie all of that together and really work at some high levels there. And that was really enjoyable. Now I was approaching the 20-year mark. I came back to Hanscom, and one of the things in the military is that typically, if you volunteer for one of these 1-year remotes, you can, I could keep my family at Hanscom, I could return, and I had about a year left at that point. I worked on a large weapon system program for that last year, and then I retired. And once I retired, I decided that I wanted to, help some of those small businesses provide those technology services products to the government, and really I wanted to keep making an impact. So I felt like this was the best way I could do that. And it became very apparent to me after, consulting, I don't know, probably 50 to 100 companies, that putting a podcast together with a repository of information that I could put out there to you would be beneficial, because it was the same, I found myself kind of giving the same speech over and over again, like how acquisitions works, and, or maybe, how a company could tweak what they're doing to see better results. And that really led to this whole podcast and to the consulting piece. And it allows my family and I to stay in Boston, and, now and then I can travel for clients and go to conferences and, go to meetings as I need to. So it's really helped, and we're really enjoying it. I'm really passionate about especially the defense acquisitions process, but government procurement in general. It's a interesting skill set. It is complex, but it can be done properly, with the right amount of effort and timeline. If you're listening to this in your company and you're looking to go on contract for the first time, it's just really getting that process down, being targeted in your approach, having some of the right techniques in place, developing those relationships. Hey guys, thank you for listening to today's episode. We appreciate each and every one of you that take time out of your busy day to listen to our podcast, listen to our interviews with small business owners and sales professionals, subject matter experts. Our hope, our mission is to increase the number of small businesses selling to the federal government and the U.S. military. And hopefully you are taking some great tactics and strategies away from these podcast episodes. We'd really appreciate it if you subscribed to the podcast and left us a review. That helps us with the numbers incredibly. And as always, if you need more help selling to the federal government, if you want to increase the number of contracts you're winning, or if you're just looking to get started, head on over to dodcontracts.com, where we have some great programs to help you out. All right, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.